Okay, so good morning, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organization to invite me for this interesting ESPON workshop. After a few years in national lockdown, and it actually feels very good to travel once again, and especially to what I consider my second country, which is Norway. And yes, I'm here in Norway, just next to Eric. So as you can see from the title of my presentation, it discusses the possible advantages of supporting development clusters for small places and territorial cohesion cities to achieve this goal of a more cohesive European territory, which is a EU goal, and it's something that ESPON is, of course, providing a lot of evidence on this. But to achieving territorial cohesion in a given territory, there is a need to that socioeconomic lagging regions perform better than leading regions in most territorial development indicators over a certain period of time. And here it is widely known that rural areas are often associated with comparable underperforming development trends, as Irene and Bjornar and especially Anna showed in her maps. And I'm also a geographer, so I like these kind of presentations. So how does regional theory proposes to correct these territorial trends that are usually not supporting of territorial cohesion, but is more supporting of territorial exclusion. And so it looks, if one looks at this evolution of these, some of these mainstream regional development paradigms, one can actually notice increasing consideration of encompassing endogenous economic factors in regional development strategies. So this is something that everyone agrees that the place-based development is a fundamental path to achieving more development in rural areas. In even more recent regional development theories, which I'm sure Bjornar will discuss with deeper knowledge, they highlight this need to consider also key regional institutions, players, agencies to foster regional development. So you need to have an involvement in a multi-level degree from local to regional stakeholders to develop an appropriate regional development strategy, like Irene was very keen in passing this message. So, but instead, I kind of propose what I think is a more comprehensive approach for regional development, which I call the strategic-based regional development approach, which integrates this, which I consider for me the 6 existing development paradigms, which include the goal for more balanced and cohesive territory. So in very synthesis, what I would propose for any regional developer is that it focus on proactive policies that are not only foster sustainable based development, which is more or less agreed by everyone that is the way to go in the future, but also this what Irene spoke very well, the importance of having an institutional-based approach with a strong administrative capacity, and also in where territorial cooperation, as highlighted by Bjornar, is very important to achieving a stronger and sound regional development approaches. Of course, continue to support this knowledge-based approach by supporting human capital and entrepreneurship in regions, but always with this place-based approach, you know, because every region has different challenges and needs. So you need to have this into consideration when you design your development strategy. On the other hand, as a geographer, I've always defended this idea of territorial cohesion. So the strategies to develop the regions should have, in my opinion, a balance-based approach by supporting a urban polycentrism between small places, medium cities, larger cities, and policy integration. And finally, for some rich countries, they don't think that this is very important, but in many lagging regions, there's still a need for more infrastructure. And let's take the case of the airport that Bjornar show how important it is to foster tourism in inner Scandinavia. So in improving telecommunications, like Anna showed, that is being done in these rural areas. So I think these are the 6, in my opinion, main policy arenas in which regional development strategic should support. But as we all know, and I've studied cohesion policy for a long time in many countries, including Portugal, Spain, Sweden, All existing studies that I've done and that I've read show that at the national level, territorial cohesion has not been achieved. So what can you do to change this? So a few years ago, I proposed this approach to support this territorial cohesion cities theory, which basically the basis of this idea is that when you have public funding, you need to have criteria. You can't just use it everywhere. So the idea of the territorial cohesion cities is that in lagging regions, put more money in these medium towns, because there will be the hubs, a development of the region and create the spillovers for development. And of course, to identify these territorial cohesion cities, there is a series of criteria. They are published in a paper. I did the work for Iberian Peninsula. I selected what are, in my opinion, for Portugal and Spain, should be the cities, the medium cities that should receive more public funding. But a colleague of mine defined with the same criteria a few of these cities in Scandinavia, for in this case for Sweden, Norway, and Finland. And as you can see here, Amar is one of them. It should be one of the cities that we selected to receive more funding for regional development in all Scandinavia. So, of course, based on the criteria that we propose in the theory. So, how can we deal with these rural areas that normally do not have large and medium cities acting as drivers of regional development? Based on the recent research presented by Beer and Klauer, one of the ingredients to support this development is cluster development. Of course, it's widely known, as Bjornar was very clear, that despite the advantages of regional clustering, there is a few disadvantages, such as the excessive dependency on a single economic domain or sector. And Bjornar gave that concrete example on how Trysil area depends so much on tourism, and then after the pandemic, you know, they kind of paid the price for this. So, but when I speak about clustering in the proposed theory for development clusters, it's not only on the economic side, it's more regional strategic. So in this context, we propose that the bulk of public funding destined to develop rural areas should target municipality clusters, collective strategies rather than individual municipality strategies. This is called the development cluster for small place theory, that is supported by the possibility that intermunicipal collaboration is done in four main domains: in the exploration of functional linkages and interdependencies. In these areas, you always tend to have a medium city and smaller cities that have functional connections through, for instance, commuting. Also to support to increasing accessibility and connectivity, and areas that have similar specialization areas of economy and economic circularity. And finally, areas in which municipalities should see advantages in cooperating and use this potential for advantages in governance implementation. So, but what is exactly a small place? We saw a presentation there identifying it from 5,000 to 2,000 people. But of course, this depends from country to country. Normally, it encompasses a territory with small, medium urban settlements in a national context surrounded by rural areas. And indeed, Norway is a very good example of a country with vast rural areas and small urban settlements, and everybody that has traveled in Norway knows this very well. It makes it a very beautiful country also in its landscape. But if one takes the region of, for instance, Inlandet, which is a new region, it is possible to apply these development clusters for small places theory by using certain indicators like the local labor markets, which I took from a study in Nordregio, to identify these functional areas within certain municipality clusters which share similar development challenges and needs, and that, in my opinion, would make it more efficient in the use of regional development funding. Look, I come from Portugal, and Portugal has been in the EU since 1986, and we've received tons of money from the EU, And municipalities, they tend to use this money for their own individual interests, or the interests of the mayors in being re-elected. And so you can find in small municipalities very few people, these Olympic swimming pools, in these beautiful pavilions. So money is not being used for the good of the common good. It's not being used for the development of the region in terms of rural areas. Is used for the interests of each municipality. And what I propose is a different approach, is using money and using in these inter-municipality communities that have their own development strategies to make more efficient use of funding. Of course, if you use data on economic specialization, and this data I took it from the national statistics, it can unveil certain potential municipal clusters that could join efforts in maximizing their development strategies to compete in the global market in a given economic activity. And here you have in the inland that you have many areas that have similar economic similarities. For instance, in the area of rural development, agriculture, for instance. It is also safe to say that when it comes to cross-border cooperation, municipal clustering is already being experimenting in the past years, especially in the Nordic regions. There is quite a lot of these cross-border cooperation associations. We have here, for instance, in England, that a very old one of the oldest ones in Europe, the ARCO Corporation, and you have a relatively recent one, the trust fund. So this already exists, and it could be shown as a good example of how municipalities can actually join efforts to use public funding in a certain domain of development. And finally, if we consider existing connectivity and accessibility connections in inland, that it's also possible to identify 6 distinct municipal clusters that could boost their cooperation in several development domains with higher levels of effectiveness and efficiency. For this, of course, we would need the knowledge of colleagues like Bjornar, and of course the knowledge from regional developers like Eric and Bjorn. So in the end, I presented this theoretical rationale to develop small places by funding municipality clusters rather than individual municipalities, since the latter approach has not revealed as the most effective way to spend development funding from the examples that we know. And I've studied Portugal, Spain, Sweden, and of course a bit of Norway. And this would complement, these small places theoretical rationale would complement the rationale for the territorial cohesion cities as a concrete theoretical solution to achieving territorial cohesion, which is actually being applied tried to be applied by Portugal, because Portugal, I think, is one of the few countries that actually has a minister for territorial cohesion, which knows this theory that I presented of territorial cohesion cities, and that they have tried to apply this in Portugal with not so much success, because the local municipalities, they don't want to lose their power in accessing the money and use it for their own interests. So this is a challenging, but it depends on the governments to make these tough decisions. So I finished my presentation here, and many thanks for the audience.